Minister, just in regards to questions around health, I just wanted to go to you first before your departmental officers. And I know you've mentioned in both the Senate and here today that it really is up to the Health Department to determine whether there will be blood testing for residents in Katherine. Could I just ask what conversations there have been between yourself and the Federal Health Minister over the issue?
Well, Senator, I don't intend to go into private conversations between myself and my Cabinet colleagues, but suffice to say that the Health Department is well apprised of the issues around PFAS contamination. As I said, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Dr Hobbs, Dr Hobbs has been of great assistance in terms of being available to communities, attending meetings and representing health in that context. And health, of course, under the then direction of Minister Ley, made the announcements and decisions in relation to both the epidemiological study and the commencement of blood testing in Williamtown and Oakey.
So you will wait for the outcome of the epidemiological study?
No, the epidemiological study, if I understand it correctly, Senator, is a longer-term study, one that is focused on the two communities currently who have the completed human health risk assessments and other risk assessments. What I have indicated and would repeat now is that Defence takes advice on health initiatives related to these issues from health.
Okay. Now, this may be for you or your departmental officers, but just in relation to Air Services Australia's evidence to one of our committees this week, and I know that it was canvassed with Senator Gallagher in terms of the Darwin firefighters and what they're using now. And you did reference that the PFAS or the foam that was being used does have trace elements of PFAS.
That's correct, Senator.
Okay, and you're confident that those elements are safe?
So I think the first point I'd make there is that most of the training is now done just with pure water without actually using the Anscholite product for training purposes. And as I recall from the Air Services Australia evidence, they took a question on notice, I think, to provide some data about how often Anscholite is actually used. I'm confident the answer will be very infrequently. And when it is used for training, because we do need to occasionally run some actual product through the fire engines, it's collected and taken away for treatment appropriately. So when we talk about trace elements of PFAS in the Anscholite, if I was just talking in a casual conversation somewhere, I'd say there isn't any. But we do try and stick to scientifically verified information, and we know there are very, very tiny amounts, like orders of magnitude less than the products that were replaced. PFAS is not put into Anscholite when it's made. We don't know why we're finding trace elements in there. Could be contamination or some form of cross-contamination during the manufacturing process. We don't know, but the amounts we're talking about are minuscule. So in a barbecue conversation, we'd say there isn't any, but because we want to stick to the absolute facts and be open and transparent and honest, we say, well, there are trace elements, but it's of PFAS. It's very, 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 very low amounts.
Air Services Australia spoke about the constant monitoring of the firefighters in relation to that, and that blood testing was not part of that monitoring. Can you expand on that situation?
So just worth appreciating that Air Services Australia provide firefighting services at two places, Darwin and Townsville, under contract to Defence. Our contract is about them providing the firefighting service. We provide it ourselves at all of the other Defence bases. So we have no involvement or visibility of the Air Services Australia and how they deal with their own staff. That's a matter for Air Services Australia. So I'm not able to help in terms of any of those sort of questions that might go to their own interactions with their own people.
No, you have actually helped. Thank you for that. Now, in regards to, you also spoke earlier about non-litigated claims, and that one was from Katherine. Are you able to expand on what that non-litigated claim is?
That wouldn't be appropriate, Senator.
No.
Could you let us know if you've had any other claims from Katherine?
Certainly to date, we just have that one claim from Katherine.
Just in terms of the timelines, and we're just trying to understand this, in terms of Williamtown and Oakey, what were the dates again that you were made aware of the concerns there?
Can you clarify the question?
PFAS?
That in particular, how did you...
In terms of the year, the date, when did Defence become aware that PFAS was an issue?
That's a difficult question to answer. We can provide a timeline of various interactions or studies that have been done. I guess probably the most, the date that I'd give you would be around December 2012. 2011, where we had some testing on the base that indicated PFAS in some of the drains on the base.
And what steps were taken to have a look at Defence Force bases around the country from there?
I apologise, Senator, didn't quite catch your
What
question.
steps were taken to look at other Defence Force sites around the country?
So the first thing we did, around that time, we were also looking at Oakey and Williamtown. We were focused on those areas initially. Then, as we began to learn more about this, we started doing, if you like, a desktop analysis around the other places where these products may have been used. I think it's worth recounting, even as recently as late 2011, early 2012, the industry people we were dealing with and the EPAs as well didn't have the sort of PFAS chemicals sort of high on their agenda of things to worry about. Also, there wasn't an understanding of how these chemicals transport themselves in the environment. We have a much more detailed understanding today as a consequence of the analysis that we've done. The environmental management world, be they consultants or regulators, we're very much used to dealing with more what you call more traditional types of chemicals, hydrocarbons and solvents and the like, that you get from industrial properties, and they don't tend to transport themselves very far.
Well, when did you consider Katherine and Darwin as a place that you needed to look at?
So that would have been as a result of our desktop analysis, looking at the sites where these chemicals would have been used.
In what year was that?
I'd have to be
Would
sure.
you like
I'd
to
just
take
have to
that
come
on
back
notice?
on that. Yeah.
But what we did do, Senator, is in 2016, as a result of that desktop analysis, we undertook a preliminary sampling
Oh, so
program.
the desktop analysis was 2016?
No. As a result of the
Okay.
desktop analysis in 2016, we undertook a preliminary sampling program at 12 properties around Australia. And what that preliminary sampling program did was provide us with information about PFAS there and whether or not there was viable pathways for PFAS to migrate from our bases into the environment. And as a result of that preliminary sampling program, and we released that report that we received from the consultant in November of last year, in 2016, we're now undertaking the detailed environmental investigations.
So between 2012 and 2016, there was no notification to Katherine or Darwin in terms of this issue?
No, because I think the desktop analysis would have been undertaken in around 2015, but we'll come back with the dates of when we did that work. The focus at that time was very much on Williamtown and Oakey.
But by concern, Senator, it might be worthwhile making the point too that in the early 2000s, and Mr Gruszkowiak mentioned the change of product, and that was due to information that we received about the persistence of these chemicals in the environment and in people. It was in that event in 2012 at Williamtown where I think it's fair to say Defence started to really become aware of the transportability of the chemicals in terms of their ability to migrate from our bases into the community, and that PFAS, like what Mr Gruszkowiak said just before, many of the contaminants that we deal with are very static. They stay quite close or travel only a few hundred metres from the source areas. But due to the transportability of PFAS and its ability to be carried by water, that it could travel further distances.
I guess what I'm trying to understand here, Mr Brewer, is that in 2012 you've identified a real concern. And what steps were taken to communicate that concern, or even a red light to places like Katherine and Darwin, that this could be something you need to consider? Was any email, any attempt to inform?
At that time, we did not take steps to talk to communities other than places like Oakey.
Why was that?
We didn't understand the full nature of this problem. This has been a learning process for us. We are constantly contacted by people from Europe and America asking how we're going, because we're ahead of them in trying to understand this problem. I think, as I said, and I've said before, if we knew back in 2012 what we know today, we would have responded differently. But hindsight is a marvellous thing. We didn't fully comprehend the potential for these chemicals to move as far as they have at that time. Remember also
has there been an error here in that?
Well, I think decisions were made with the knowledge of the day. Remember at that time, in 2012, there were no standards that regulated these chemicals. In fact, the health-based guidance values that we now have for drinking water and recreational water were only produced or announced on the 3rd of April this year. No food regulatory body in the world has made any regulation for the amounts of these chemicals that could be allowable in food, because they do not see a need to do that. The Department of Health, as advised by the Environmental Health Standing Committee, which is the peak body in Australia for health matters, it includes the chief medical officers from federal and state, all the federal and state authorities, continues to advise that there's no consistent evidence that exposure to these chemicals causes any adverse human health effect in people. But as a precaution, because we know they last a long time, we know they have the ability to bioaccumulate through a food chain, then exposure should be limited. That's why we take a precautionary approach. It's why we provide drinking water to people whose only source of water is or could be contaminated, bore water above health-based guidance values.
So Defence wrote to Oakey residents in 2014. When did you write to the Katherine residents?
The issue was publicly put out in connection with the preliminary site investigation. So the first engagement would have been, I think, in late 2016. We'll just check that one.
23rd of November 2016 was the first community engagement at Katherine.
So that was a public meeting, not letters to residents, is that correct?
That was a public meeting. I don't think we've done letters to all the residents of Katherine. I'd need to check that, but we've had several community engagement sessions. We've done, obviously, media up in Katherine, trying to make people as aware as possible of what we're doing. That's how we, introduce ourselves to the people who are reliant on bores, and while we're providing water to those 53 properties that I mentioned earlier, we're now funding For those people, we're funding rainwater tanks, which will be delivered before the end of the year so that they're there for the wet season. And that gives those people a clean water supply that will be an enduring solution for them.
Okay, I've just got time for 2 more questions. And you may want to take this one on notice. The differences, please, on your testing regime for the dry season and your testing regime for the wet season.
So our consultants that are doing the work, they think for completeness, we should do sampling of both ground and surface water at the different times of the year, in particular because of the nature of the wet and dry issue up there. So we've got a range of samples at the moment. We did take some samples during the latter half of the last wet season. We've done a lot of sampling now through the dry season, and there'll be more sampling as the wet season comes around again. And that was recommended by our environmental consultants. Seems to me like the right thing to do, just so that we really understand whether there's any difference or what the differences are in terms of levels of PFAS in either bore or river or town water.
Okay, and just finally, the Katherine residents certainly would like a one-stop shop. Minister, is there a chance where information, a place where they can go to actually find out everything they need to know in relation to what they should be doing and what they need to know around this issue?
Senator, in terms of that approach, I understand Senator Scullion, from a PM&C perspective, has indicated it is possible to pursue that, and that is being considered at the moment, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Can I, one thing I think it's useful to note for the record, if I may, Chair, briefly, is that when Defence extended so significantly the investigation program to the number of sites that we've been talking about today, at the beginning of this process, my recollection is, and I stand to be corrected by the Deputy Secretary, that there were only 2 laboratories in Australia at the time who were capable and accredited of actually doing the investigative and testing work, accredited at the appropriate environmental and professional levels. Only 2 in Australia. So we are now investigating and potentially testing across 23 sites here, which is a very, very considerable amount of work. When we talk about testing, we mean thousands, multiples of thousands of items and tests being made at each of these sites. So Defence has worked very hard to encourage the sector to develop the capacity to support this process. And Mr Grishkowiak is correct when he says that in international terms, Australia has been much more proactive in the work that has been done here in the last couple of years than literally anywhere else in the world. Mm-hmm. And so we are consulting internationally, consulting in Europe, consulting in the United States, and working with those counterparts on the sort of work that we are doing. But it is something which, as we roll this out, we are very cognizant of the importance of this to communities. We understand that it is a very difficult circumstance and environment in which to live. I do not underestimate that for a moment, Senator McCarthy, not for a moment. And we are working closely with our counterparts in health and in environment and in other agencies to provide the most information we can and to have this work completed as quickly as we can across all of these sites.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Kitching.